Good morning and welcome to the new Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin in the spring of 2020. As our regular viewers know, there's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see, either a food bank in their area, or one that's important to them, or one designated by our guest speaker. We've been doing these for about a year now, and we want to acknowledge our very, very generous audiences for their incredible support of food banks worldwide. The ADR and litigation communities have just been so generous. One of my favorite parts of our webinar every week is when we announce the running total. These are just the contributions of which we know. Jean, I think you have the total for us this week, please.
I do. It's an amazing number, Jeff. It's $102,615. Fantastic.
Wow, that is just incredible. Thank you all so much for your generosity. And we're going to add to that total today. I know everyone will be inspired by a great presentation by Ava Abramowitz, professorial lecturer in law at the George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. And that is where Ava is as she addresses us today. Ava is a former assistant United States attorney for the District of Columbia, and now she teaches negotiations at George Washington University Law School, where she is researching the communication behaviors used in mediations. She is the author of The Architect's Essentials of Negotiation, second edition, published by John Wiley & Sons in 2009. I've read portions of that book, and let me tell you, they're applicable not just to architects. She is also the writer of dozens of articles on critical negotiation and mediation issues facing lawyers and clients, the most recent of which is Modern Consultative Sales Theory, published in 2019 by the ABA section on dispute resolution in its newest book, Negotiation Essentials for Lawyers. I've heard Ava give presentations at many conferences over the years, and each time I've come away just dazzled by what Ava has had to offer. And so often I've thought she has just been the very best presenter at an entire multi-day conference. With that, Ava, we're also looking forward to your presentation, how modern sales theory applies to negotiation and mediation. We'd love for you to tell us first about the food bank that is important to you and to which we'd love people to direct their contributions if they're in a position to contribute. Then proceed with your what I know is going to be a wonderful presentation. Ava, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I want to tell you how I got to GW today. I live way out in the country. We don't have bandwidth. I flunked bandwidth with my reflective practitioner group yesterday. I started to panic, and then I thought, no, maybe GW will help me. Did GW help me? My dean, Lisa Skank, went to her dean, Emily Hammond, who went to Tammy Tidesdale, and Andrew Lawrence, who's in charge of the Media Center, came in to take care of me for the day, off his vacation. I could not be more grateful to GW. And in addition, there are other people I'm grateful for. One is Jeff, of course, for inviting me, and Jean and Natalie, who have held my hand all the way through this process. I was born in the 1800s, and doing a Zoom call with a lot of people is new to me. So I have shared screen, and here I go. Bread for the City is my choice of where to give money because they take care of so many people, and it is such a joy what they do. It is probably the largest food bank in the United States of America. And today it has a garden and an orchard, and it provides a massive amount of food for 32,000 people. And I asked them yesterday how many people they had this year as opposed to last year. They're dealing with 100,000 people this year because of the pandemic. And for all those who, for no reason of their doing, lost their jobs because the city closed down. In addition, they have a free medical clinic, a social work clinic, clothing program, legal clinic, dental. I mean, they are a city unto themselves. And I would appreciate if you are going to send any money and you don't have a local food bank in your own vicinity, please send it to Bread for the City. And if not, then send it to someone in your local neighborhood. All of us who are lucky enough to have lots of food to eat certainly appreciate those people who don't. And this is one way of helping them out. So, in front of our effective practitioner group, I said, I'm going to talk about mod sales theory. And they all said to me, oh no, when you say sales theory, negotiation and mediation and put it together, a lot of people are going to get sick. But modern sales theory has everything to do with understanding. And that is exactly what mediation and negotiation are all about. It is as supportive of getting to yes as any program can be. So steal freely from this, try it out, see if it works for you, and tell me about it. So it is all based on evidence. And they found out that when uncertain and pressed, it is far easier for people to say no than to say yes. A no can be retracted. A yes, not so much. And in order to look out for people, the best salespeople help them come to a shared understanding of what is going on. In other words, persuasion is generated by a buyer-seller sharing, clarifying their understanding, and not by seller telling. And for any of you who are lawyers and were brought up on advocacy, in a lot of ways, that is seller telling. So try to remember that it is much easier for people to persuade themselves than it will ever be for you to persuade them. And that is why I fell in love with consultative selling. It sang to me. It made me realize that if I were pushing, I was losing. So let's talk about this, which is the one aspect of consultative selling that I want to talk about today. It has a spectrum so wide that I thought instead of teaching you too much and having you walk out learning nothing, I would focus on the one little thing that made me use these theories right away as soon as I discovered them. And that is what a dispute goes through. How do people with high-stake problems and unknown risk achieve enough clarity of understanding to make a decision to let go of their dispute? That is the hardest thing I know of in negotiation and mediation, getting the other person to let go, getting the other person to agree to move. And that applies to all of us too. So let me show you what that decision is. It's based on a buyer-centered decision-making process. So whereas most of the books that I've read talk about the power of the mediator, and consultative selling, the power rests completely with the buyer. And indeed, if you think about it, that's also true about mediation. So the first thing you have to do is have the parties recognize their own needs. Sounds simple. The second thing is help them evaluate options. The third thing is to resolve any concerns they have. With one eye to implementability, help them make a decision, and then think about the success they will have if all it goes well. So I'm going to take it to me personally, and then I'm going to ask you to apply it yourself personally, and then we'll see where it takes us. So recognition of needs. My late husband, he died, and I had to buy a new car. And we had a division of labor. He took care of everything mechanical, and I took care of everything else. And so I did not know what to do. And I mentioned this to my aunt, and she said, go to this person. He is in charge of service, not sales, but he'll help you. So I went and I met Sam. And Sam said, sit down. Your aunt tells me you need a car. And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, do you like driving? And I said, no, I hate driving. He said, why do you hate driving? I said, well, cars go too fast. I can't hold my lane. When a big car comes by me in my little runabout, it pushes me over. I almost fell off the road. I don't go fast. It's a runabout for a city. And now I have to start driving on highways, and I don't know what to do. And he said, well, let me see if I understand you. And he repeated back to me what he had heard. The car's a runabout. only for the city. You need something for the highway, strong enough and big enough that you won't feel cowed by other cars and you can't get pushed off the road. I said, yes, that's exactly what I need. He said, come on out into the lot. I'll show you all your options. So he showed me all the options and he talked about the pros and cons of each of them. And then he showed me a Highlander. And I looked at the Highlander and I said, I'll never be able to parallel park that. And he said, oh, and showed me the Camry. He said, what do you think of this one? I said, it's beautiful. It's good. He said, well, drive it and then decide. So I did. And then he said, any concerns? I said, yeah, what's it like on the highway? He said, let's go on the highway. When we came back, he said, any concerns? And I said, does it come in blue? And he said, yes. And I drove it off and was extraordinarily happy. I went through absolutely everything and I backtracked. It's not linear. You can have recognition of needs, and in evaluating options, you may realize you have another need. You can go to resolutions of concern and absolutely work out all your levels of concern. And then when you go to a decision, something still is freezing you. And often it's an emotional need that you may not be aware of. So let's take it to you. You're in a job. The job was great until another company bought your company. You hate your boss. That's okay, because he hates you. You're not earning as much money as you think you should be earning, and you want a new job. You say to your wife, I'm thinking of a new job. She said, you want to change again? And you say yes. And so you start thinking, what do I need? Think about it yourself. What kinds of questions would you ask if you were thinking of switching a job? These are the ones I came up with. Does it mean I have to move the family? Does it mean the kids have to change schools? What is the boss going to want me to do? I don't care as much about money as long as I grow and become happier and more excited about what I'm doing. You have all these needs. And when it comes time to evaluating options, you have to say which of my needs are good, which of my needs are not so important, which ones are high priority. It's hard to go through that. And that's what mediation or having an assisted negotiation is all about. Someone who's not emotionally invested, who can raise questions that you may not have been able to raise to help you through this process. And then you come to resolution of concerns and you finally say, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. That means I have to negotiate for A, B, and C with my new boss. And if he says no to any of them, I have to keep on looking. So it works out perfectly with your boss, and then you have to make a decision. And you're frozen. Something is stopping you from making a decision. And this happens in negotiation and always happens in mediation. Not always, often happens in mediation. And it's usually something really deeply buried that's stopping you. And you say to the person, you want to move and you're being stuck. What's happening? And the person says, my wife said you're going to look for a job again. So you have to go back, resolutions of concerns, evaluation of options, to try to figure out what he's afraid of that's stopping him from moving. So that's the process you go through when it's an individual, and you have more power as an individual in deciding your own future. In a mediation, it's often different, and people get stuck at each and every one of those phases. And it's your job as a mediator or as counsel. You see a lot of my friends here who are lawyers to help them through that process. So we're going to go through it together ourselves, but I just wanted you to know what it's about. Because when I read it, I said, oh my God, that's why people get stuck. They have to make a high-risk decision in a high-stakes situation, absolutely uncertain of the implementability of their decision or the consequences of their decision. As I like to say to my class, you're asking someone to jump off a bridge and you can't guarantee there's going to be water there. Because as a mediator, it's not your problem, it's not your solution, and you don't have the power to make it nice after the person sides. So it's a really tough situation that a disputant is in. And when you begin to think more about the disputant and the way they view the world, other options become available to you as a mediator. Now, I know there are lots of ways people go through decision-making process. I got a email from Cedar. They're putting on the decision-making process, and I'm hoping to learn how they do it in England. But this is how modern sales theory teaches it and has been teaching it, I think, for 40 years. Everyone basically have in common? What is the elephant in the room in a mediation? It's risk. It's absolutely risk. They have to talk, they have to listen, they have to juggle, and they have to do it all with, if you're in the commercial world, style and a lot of aplomb. When basically they would like to have their own way because they're used to having their own way. And the risk of giving up their own way to incorporate someone else's needs for a lot of people is scary, especially if their own needs are not taken care of too. So when we talk about risk, it depends upon your expertise. Lawyers usually talk about litigation risk. What happens if you don't settle? What will happen to your trial? And those kinds of questions. Now, I was an assistant U.S. attorney for 5 years. I stopped counting judge trials when I hit 100. I stopped counting jury trials when I hit 30. I stopped counting counts of appeal, appellate cases when I hit 15. And I could never tell which way the court was going to go. And I could never tell which way the jury was going to go. And I won cases that nobody on God's earth thought could be won. And I have lost cases that nobody thought could be lost. So I'm not sure that conveying risk on our databases is all that helpful to people. It may be. It's something that should be researched and tested. But I have found that if you deal with human risk, if you truly work hard to help the person understand themselves and you to understand them also, then you can be substantially more creative in helping them come to a solution. So there are two types of information. There's external information, which is facts, all about the objective world. And there's internal information, the kind of information I'm talking about when I talk about human risk. Perceptions, feelings, attitudes, motives, those kinds of issues that sometimes you work to hide in order to function well. But they're there, and they have an impact on your thinking. We code the behaviors of all the people in mediation, and we have a database so small that I'm scared to tell you this because I'm afraid you'll take it as fact. On 35 cases, it's interesting, but it's not 100% believable. But so far, we have found that for every 2 questions or statements about fact, there's only 1 question or statement about feelings, about internal information. Is that normal? Could be. Is that effective? Could be, but it goes to show where we mostly think. So this is how I explain mediation to the parties. And I do this in order to empower them. There are some people who feel that mediators are hired to solve the case. And indeed, in a lot of industries, that is precisely why a mediator is hired. They have expertise, they're a prior judge, they're knowledgeable in the field, they know the science, and yes, that's why they're hired. And indeed, the parties want them to decide the case. And there are other situations where the parties want to decide the case. This works, what I'm teaching right now works for both situations. It does not judge mediators. It gives a set of skills that can be used by anyone at any time. But the way I explain it to mediation, because I'm a person who believes it's up to them to solve the case, is I tell them, in any dispute, you have one choice. You can lump it or go to war. Lump it is just kiss it off, life is not always fair, or you can go to trial. But as you go to trial, your power decreases substantially until it's arbitration. A group of people are going to decide your future, not with respect to your interests and needs, but with respect to the law and the facts. Or in court, a jury or a judge is going to decide it. Again, not with respect to your needs, but with respect to the law and the facts. Or by lumping it, the more you go to war, the higher the cost is. And mediation is the sweet spot. You have the power, it's relatively low cost, it's absolutely voluntary. You're not bound by anything until you alone make the determination to be bound. That's very empowering. And the other reason I like mediation is you can do things in mediation that you can never do in court. Court just says someone's right, someone's wrong, someone owes somebody else money. But in mediation, you can settle a case any way you want, as long as it's constitutional, legal, and not against public policy. So keeping that in mind, let's go back to the decision-making process. Recognition of needs. These are the kinds of questions that go with it. Key issue here is, does the person need to change? Does the person need to act? Do they want to stay in Lumpet or do they want to move? So they want to know whether they even have a problem and how serious it is and what benefits will they get from solving it. These are the kinds of needs that they need to work out. Is there a reason to move? I mean, if you were 100% happy with your situation, you wouldn't move anywhere. Why would you bother to move? You're 100% happy. You have to be less than 100% happy. And for some people, it's a small line, and for a lot of people, it's a big line. So what you would want to know, or the question I always ask is, do you want to settle the case or settle the problem? One of the joys of mediation, especially where I do it, I am a court mediator for the DC Circuit and for the Federal District Court for the District of Columbia, is a lot of people say, no, I want to settle the problem. I want to settle the problem that ended up causing this case so that I can get on with my life. And mediation allows you to do that. Sometimes they just want to settle the case. When the lawyer says, just settle the case, I go, would you mind checking with your client and see if he agrees or she agrees? And sometimes they come back and say, yep. And sometimes they say, no, if you can get the problem settled, that would be terrific. So why, when we first hear of a problem, do we all jump to a solution? I can't see you while I'm doing the slides. So if someone could kind of tell me, how many of you are lawyers?
Ava, we can't, at least I can't see the slides. There we go. Now,
Okay.
now the screen is up.
I'm
Perfect.
sorry, this is where you send money, and this is the process that we go through. Can you see all the boxes?
Yes.
Yes.
And this is what you have in common, human risk. This is the type of information. This makes much more sense of the go to war sign that I showed you earlier. And here is decision making. Now, if you are a trained lawyer and you know precisely what is expected of a lawyer, when someone says, I have a problem with A, you figure out how to solve it. But there are problems about solving it. Is that what you're saying? That's not what I want you to see. Okay, here are the problems of solving it. One, you do it because you think you're adding value, makes you feel good. And you also want the mediation or the negotiation to move forward. And you like your idea, so by presenting it, you're hoping it will. You also are thinking, look, they hired me to give them solutions. So they expected to talk about solutions to prove how great they were to hire you. It's easy to do. We get very, very good at it. And if we have a great idea, it just comes to mind. You can't help but want to share it because it's your idea and it's good. But what ends up happening? It's the worst thing we can do. Why? Because the people who are listening might not be ready to hear it. And if they're not ready to hear it, what are they going to do? It's always easier to say no than say yes. They'll say, no, it doesn't work for me. At that point, your idea is gone. You can't bring it back. And yet some people do. In Maryland, where they also coded live mediations, people said they didn't like pressing. And the way they described it, it hit me that maybe it was someone who came up with a solution and kept on pressing for the parties to get it. One of the problems of it is, it's the easiest way to impasse. To come forward with an idea that you love way before people are ready to hear it. And the other reason why it's not good is you may not understand the problem. You're answering a problem that you can answer, but you may not be answering the problem that they're having. I remember a friend of mine once said to me when I started law school, he said, you never have to have the right answer, just write your assumptions. I had a test on minks and sales and it was all convoluted and I didn't know the answers. So I said, assuming the mink dies, here's the answer. And he got an A because he knew the answer to that one. In mediations and negotiations, you don't get an A. You don't get an A until there's a settlement that is implementable and is successfully implemented by the parties. That's what they want. That's what they need, and they define success, not us. So, step 2, decision making. Any questions so far? Anything in the chat? Are people liking this or having questions or anything?
They're finding it fascinating. And I would say this is great. That's just a quote that came up. So yeah, just keep speaking up. Everybody's listening. That's great. Thank you.
Terrific. Recognition of needs is just as hard because it goes to evaluation of options. In evaluation of options, the key issue is, what are my choices? And which one is the best one for me? These are the kinds of things they're asking. What's cheaper? Which one will my board accept? Which option is better and more likely to succeed than the other? That's what you're asking here. So very often you say, how can we start figuring out options for you to consider? So I have a story on this one. An ambassador, his country sued the United States. I had all these lawyers in the room. He was stuck, they were stuck, and I said to the ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, all these people here are mediators. How would you feel if I took them out the room and had them brainstorm and come back with you with choices for you to make? He said he'd like that. He's tired, he needed a cup of coffee. I said, go have your coffee and come back. And I said to the mediators, if we can't come up with a lot of options, we're really not helping this fellow. So we did. We came up with 5 options, and then we talked about how we could strengthen each option and how we could cure each option so that each option was eminently implementable. And then one of the parties said, I didn't like this option. And another party said, well, if you can cut out an option, I want to cut out an option. And we went back into the room with the ambassador and said, Mr. Ambassador, you have 3 options. Do you have any questions? And he went through the options. Everyone answered the questions, went over the pros, went over the cons, and he made a decision. And I said, well, sir, you're tired, you're jet lagged. Why don't we just hold this in abeyance, sleep well tonight and tomorrow? You can rethink it if you want to. He said, are you kidding me? This is a great decision. And I said, why? I always ask why. I never say thank you, because it gives the person an opportunity to think it through one more time. And he thought it through one more time, and that was the end of the case. So, want to avoid impasse? Do not fall in love with your own decisions and your own solutions. In fact, instead of proposing content and solutions, a lot of people use something called investigating possibilities. So they go, you know, an idea just hit my head. I don't know if it's good or bad, but have you ever thought about this? What would happen if? And that way, people have an opportunity to tussle with the idea, and it's not personal to you. So, resolution of concerns. Resolution of concerns is more about the internal information that someone has. Something is stopping them from deciding. Something is. And I had a case where a woman was run over by a bus, and I said to her, what was it like to be run over by a bus? What do you want to do with your life? And she talked and talked and talked until we finally worked out what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to go back to school. She needed X amount of money to do it. She needed salary. She needed everything. She said, and that's why I'm stuck. I said, hold on a second. Let me go next door. And I went next door and I said to him, how'd you like to help a young woman start a new life? And they said they would love to. And so they paid for everything, including the legal fees, and she was still not sure. And I said, what's stopping you? And she said, can I make a phone call? She called her boyfriend, came back and said, we'll accept. Something is stopping them. When someone comes up to me and says, what do you think I should do? I invariably say, I think you know what you want to do, but what's stopping you? And then it's a question of dealing with that very last concern that is freezing them in place. So the key questions you ask here are, what's going to happen? What if they screw up? Can I trust their claims? What's in it for me, the boss? Or in Washington, D.C., how will it read in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal? Or possibly more important, what will my family and friends say? So, want to avoid impasse? Always respect someone's sense of consequences. It's not your life, it's their life. It's not your problem, it's their problem. It's not your solution, it's their solution. So, don't minimize their fears. Don't prescribe solutions. Don't pressure them for quick resolutions. It's always easier to say no than yes. Help them. Give them the room to work it out. Because if they can't resolve the concern, they can't accept the deal. So, know that sometimes words have different meaning depending upon when they're said. I'm going to use an architect's idea. You forgive me, I worked with architects for 30 years. I'm a construction lawyer by trade. They're always being told you're too expensive. Don't you agree with that statement? We're going to go on. In recognition of needs, the buyer is saying to them, you cost more money than my problem. I'm not sure I need to have my problem solved. You're just too expensive and the problem is too small. And I have a wonderful story about that. I wanted to have a kitchen done and the architect came in and said, how much you paid for the house? And he said, I have an easier way for you to figure out what to do. Go to Kitchen Guild and ask them to design this and this, or this and this, and then add 50,000 to their estimate of the biggest. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not paying 50,000 plus everything else. And he said, well, let's see what we can do with existing space. So it wasn't that he was too expensive, it was that my dream was too expensive. But you need to figure out what it is, because the question is, are you worth it? Evaluation of options. When you hear you're too expensive, the person is basically saying, I've got cheaper prices and you have not demonstrated value. I'm not sure why you're better than they and why you're worth the money. And then resolution of concerns. They say you're too expensive. You're basically saying, given everything I want, it's too risky. There's something inside of me telling me not to do it. So you have to listen hard to what they're saying and figure out where they are in this process so that you can understand them as they mean it. And you can ask them, what do you mean by you're too expensive? Are you saying this, or are you saying this? Are you saying this? In order to help them through this process. Now, very, very often, you're in a situation where you think that people are being difficult. What do you do with difficult people? Yeah, sometimes the mediator is the difficult person, because they can't figure out what's going on and they don't know how to help the people. But there's not all that much written on that. But let's say you have a client, party A, and they're in the recognition of needs stage. They really don't know how big their problem is and whether they want to solve it. They don't know the contours, they don't know the implications, they don't know much of anything on it. They're stuck there. And you have another party who's close to making a decision about what he wants to do, including the decision of leaving. This is a time for you to recognize that one person's at recognition of needs and the other person has almost had it. And you can say to party B, you know, this is a good time for caucus. This is a good time for me to walk over to party A and say, come on, go for a walk with me, and help them realize what's going on inside of them so they can figure out what they want to do. Can you go out for coffee? It may take me a while. Using caucus strategically, using joint sessions strategically is something that really requires research to find out when caucus is better than joint and joint is better than caucus. But this is a situation where caucus would work really well. So please respect the process. You cannot rush people through it. At any time, they'll just stick. They'll put their feet into concrete and they will stick until they're ready to step. And do recognize that implementation is the goal. For everyone who was extraordinarily happy when they signed the Treaty of Versailles right after World War I, if they only know that it planted all the seeds for World War II. Think implementability, think implementation success, because that is the mark of a good mediation or a good negotiation. If you want to know more, most of this comes from a book by Neil Rackham, Major Account Sales Strategy, and you can always read my book, as well as these three of Neil's. Spin selling talks about questions. There are various forms of questions. Some have impact to the good and some have no impact and are not useful in a negotiation or in a mediation. Sales strategy, I just talked you through one part of it. And my favorite book is Getting Partnering Right, because if you want to get people back into business together, getting partnering right lays the seeds for how to go about doing it. So that's that. We have lots of time for questions, and I'm more than eager to answer anything that you have. Jeffrey, I can't hear you. You're in.
Ava, that was fantastic and insightful. Thank you so much. Let me ask you, now that we're mediating online in the Zoom environment or on different online platforms, what difference does that make in terms of how we approach our jobs as mediators and negotiators?
I don't know what difference it makes, by which I mean I have not coded any, so I cannot report with any statistical certainty about anything. But I can tell you, my experience of having watched them is people tend to be more transactional. They end up bargaining more than helping each other go through the process. And I don't know what that will end up meaning. A lot of the cases that are really complicated are being held in abeyance, waiting for courts to open, waiting for this, waiting for that. But on small claims cases or on small cases where the stakes are not as high, I tend to think it's more transactional, that the behaviors, the communication behaviors used by the mediator and the other parties are different. I cannot prove that. And I would really like everybody else to comment on what you think based upon your experience of having done Zoom mediations.
Let me ask you a different question, which is the typical mediation context. I think people understand they have a problem, which is they find themselves in litigation and they'd rather not be in litigation, all else equal. That's at least one dimension of the problem. And as we go through the bargaining process with them, and people seem to be getting close to decisions, these X factors, these things that come up at the last minute out of nowhere when you think you're bringing things in and you're very close to making a deal, and then all of a sudden the X factor. What can you be more specific as to some tools that mediators can use to help people identify and deal with and perhaps resolve those X factors that stand in the way of a deal that you thought they were about to make and which does seem to make sense?
Most of the reason that has an X factor, to use your term, I like that term a lot. I shall steal it with your permission.
Please.
It's emotional. It is something inside of the person that's saying, don't leap, don't go. And that means you basically have to go back to recognition of needs and help that person understand what is stopping them. Very often, it's they can't go home and tell their boss, or a lawyer doesn't want to go and tell the senior associate, or the senior associate doesn't want to tell the partner, or doesn't want to tell the client. Something is stopping them. It is real, and they're not going to move until it's resolved. And it's your job in a way to kind of be a therapist, to say, look, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but my experience is emotional needs stop people from making a leap. What's happening inside of you, do you know? Yeah. And, I work for a court that is pretty terrific. So I could say, why don't we stop? The case is not going to settle today. Why don't we meet in a week and talk to people and see what happens? And by then, they can work it out with their spouse, with their office, with something. I'll tell you a story about that. I had a case that I had worked out, and the lawyer would not settle. And I said to him, what is stopping you? And he said, the other side wants 2 checks, and our policy in our corporation is 1 check. And I don't have the power to do 2 checks, and I'm not going to ask anyone. I said, how would you feel if I spoke to the general counsel? He said, you going to go behind my back? And I said, no, I'm going to go over your head, but I'm going to go over your head with you. So we called the general counsel, and I said to the general counsel, so-and-so and so-and-so has done a wonderful job. The other side wants something that's contrary to your policy. It's 2 checks, And she said, oh, we'd be delighted if it settles the case, we'd be delighted. So those are the kinds of things that stop people. Either it's emotional, or it's political, or it's something else unique to them. And the more you can find out that internal information, the more you can give them greater degrees of freedom. And that's what they need, greater degrees of freedom.
So with respect to those degrees of freedom, Ava, you talked about adjourning mediations at the end of the day, giving people time to think. That's kind of a delicate tightrope, isn't it? There's always, in my judgment, a tension between pressing on, trying to get them to sign on the dotted line before they leave for the day, because as mediators, we're concerned that if they go home, all the progress will evaporate. They'll say to themselves, why in the world was I ever thinking of making this deal in the first place? And we have to balance that fear of progress evaporating against the fear that putting excessive pressure on people will uh, blow them out of the process. What thoughts do you have about how to balance that tension?
I'll tell you, the first time I realized that unwittingly mediators can cause an impasse is when it was 4 o'clock. I had been a nice listener, helper, good duty the whole day. And 5 o'clock, the court was going to go down, and I started pressing. And so, of course, it ended up in impasse. And I realized that my change of behaviors, my change of communication behaviors, probably undid all the progress that we had made, because suddenly they were being forced to make a decision, and the easiest thing to do was say no. I'm not sure how much the fear on the part of the mediator is that progress will be lost or that they will lose. Because very often going home, describing the deal, describing this, describing that, ends up bringing up new needs that the person hadn't been aware of, but they can be solved. And so, for example, I had one case where both parties came in and they said, this case is not going to settle. And I said, great, we have common ground. Why is it not going to settle? We put up all the reasons on the board, and we worked out all the reasons, and the case settled. And you have to do heavy lifting, but so do the parties. And their lift is substantially heavier than yours. So I was on a plane talking with a good friend, lawyer, talked about this mediation that went to 2 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning. It was all signed. One of the parties called him up and said, I don't like the deal, I'm walking out. And he said, sign, go to court, and try to get out of it. That's not a mediation success in my book. And so if somebody has something stopping them, they're either going to scuttle it in implementation, and it's a claim waiting for a place to happen, or they're going to think it through a day later, 2 days later, and come back to the table and say, this is what my problem is. And then you can deal with the problem. Mm-hmm. My court lets me do that. A lot of other courts don't. And in private, I've only done a few private ones. And in all cases, they ended up settling successfully. So I didn't do enough to be able to answer the question better than that. Can someone add to it? Can someone help on this answer from their perspective?
Well, I could say, Ava, that definitely nice to hear you say that. In addition to private mediations, I also do court mediations. I have found many times when I say to the parties, especially because in the federal court program, they're mindful of the first 3 hours being no charge and maybe not wanting to go over the time. That aside, suggesting to people when they're close, but not quite so close, just to sleep on it, and then let's reconvene again, within a few days, or do the telephone diplomacy, whatever it might be. And most oftentimes those do settle, definitely like Jeff was suggesting there in the private mediations where they're paying to be there and ideally resolving it that day. That's one thing. But then again, that phrase, mediation is a process. And it may well be that you got so far that day and accomplished an awful lot, and then they need to go back and regroup, get more information, and then reconvene. To me, as long as you have them reconvening at a very close in time, then hopefully it has not lost the value of the progress that has been made, and instead has even gone further to reconvene. They're happy to reconvene and then wrap it up.
Jean, you just triggered an idea in my head. So I do have time to explain it. In sales, when it's complicated and it's going to last a year or 2 years before a decision is made, salespeople have a concept of an advance. What can I ask them to do that will make the progress in the sale? What can they ask me to do that will make progress in the sale? And they plan advances. So when I close it. This case is not going to settle today, but it's going to settle next time. Is there anything you want him to find out that will help you? Is there anything you want him to find out or her to find out that will help you? And by giving everyone in advance, and how long does it take you to do your homework? How long do you need to do your homework? Let's meet again on this time and report on the homework and see where it takes us. It keeps the process going.
Exactly. And that often works then to finally resolve the case. And then they feel like they're vested in it. They're comfortable with their decision to do whatever the decision may be in terms of settlement. So, right. There are a couple of questions here in the chat, if I might, Ava. Okay, this first one here is, in applying your excellent impasse avoidance strategies, how do you anticipate and counter imbalances of power in mediation?
Being what I am, I'd probably talk to the person who's powerful and say, you're extraordinarily powerful. And what impact do you think it's having on the other? And the more I can possibly make a problem a shared problem, and the solution a shared solution, the more likely you'll get an implementable agreement. Because someone who has all the power, I don't want to get political, but we've watched people now negotiating that way from a position of power, and they're not getting a lot of stuff done. And so trying to bring people aboard ends up creating far more progress than pushing someone to move.
Yes, Paul?
There's a bunch of us on this call that are involved in a process called guided mediation. And in the chat box, I have put down the link to a recent article in the Indisputably website, which is one of the really great modern websites following mediation in a real serious way. So a lot of people on this call are involved in this process called guided mediation. Some people know it as Guided Choice, which is the website where we collect a lot of these processes. So take a look at the article, because it also includes references to other very recent articles on this whole subject, which and Ava is familiar with all this stuff too.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Paul.
We have Richard Lutfinger asking, have you ever seen a deal that is made subject to either side opting out within 24 hours, for example?
Oh, you've hit a trigger in my soul. The Singapore Convention says if someone wants to opt out, they have to sue and try the mediator. I personally would love a 3-day pass. If they want to back out for any reason in 3 days, they can back out, and you'll re-meet in mediation to try to figure out how to deal with that problem. I worked in the insurance industry for 10 years. And the one thing I have learned is what a claim that's gonna happen looks like. And I'll tell you a story. I was mediating the oldest case in the courthouse. It was 20-something years. It had been up to the Supreme Court twice. And it took us 2.5 years to settle the case. And it's the last meeting we're having, and a fiddle comes up. Someone slams this thing down and says, "That's it, I'm leaving." I said, "No, you're not. You're getting back into business together. You're gonna have lots of fiddles in life. Let's use the mediation to solve this fiddle so you can build fiddle practice for the next time." And the case solved. Having a claim that it's gonna happen does no good to the disputants. And to the extent that they can deal with it before they start implementation, the better it is for all of them.
Thank you.
Ava, let me ask you, in many mediations, or some mediations, it seems that there's also negotiation going on between a lawyer and their own client. There are tensions in the relationship, issues in the relationship, and that's an important part of the mediation too. Can you talk about how you deal with those issues when they arise in the context of trying to get a case settled between the different sides across the table?
Yeah, because it happens a lot. And what I usually end up doing is mediate between the lawyer and the client to help them figure out what they want to do to get them back on board. But I had a case where the lawyer had promised the client the moon, but hadn't looked at the jacket until the day of the mediation. And once he heard the other side, he didn't want to be involved in the mediation because he was going to lose. And I said, how'd you feel if I talked to your client alone? He said, oh, would you do that for me? And we ultimately got the case settled. Lawyers want so much to do well by their client, but sometimes their definition of well and the client's definition of well differ.
And so surfacing those issues is you follow the same structure as in the other
That's right.
larger negotiation, just writ small as between the lawyer and their own client.
Yes. And indeed, I meet with both sides separately in their offices way before we quote start the mediation. To me, the mediation starts on the first phone call, and it's part of the process. So I meet with one party so I truly understand what's going on. Then the other party truly understand what's going on. And then I pull the two lawyers and I say, how should we mediate this case? Is there anything you want them to know, anything you want them to know? So that when we all get together, basically everyone's comfortable. They know the process, they know what's going to happen because they helped design it. And the clients have been prepared and it works. So very often the clients sit at the table and the lawyers sit in the back. And we have the kind of mediation where they solve a problem that's wrecking them.
In the online environment, Ava, how is that different? The preparation, having access to people, configuring people, where they are on the day of the mediation, how has that changed in the online environment?
The problem with online is that technology, we're not used to dealing with the technology and fashioning it to meet our needs. We're trying to meet the needs of the technology so that we can get the mediation done. When the technology ends up being Star Trek level quality, then it won't make that kind of difference. But right now, I try to use telephone, I try to use Zoom, I try to use anything. And I'm praying for the day that everyone is double vaccinated so that we can meet person to person. I know that's not a good answer, but that's what I feel.
No, we all do the best we can under the circumstances we have, right?
Absolutely.
Ava, we have just about 1 minute left. Are there some final or concluding comments you'd like to make?
Yes, I'd like to thank Jean and Natalie and Jeff for giving me this opportunity and for creating this series, because this allows us all to hear new ideas, some good, some bad, some different, and take them home, try them out, evaluate them to see where it takes us. And that's how the profession is going to grow. So I thank you ever so much. And I ask you to give to Bread for the City or your own local food bank so that next week they have something even better to report. Thank you.
Ava, you're so welcome. The thanks are owing from us to you. Natalie, Jean, any final comments?
Just thank you. It's wonderful, Ava. It's so nice to meet you, and everybody. Thank you again for your generosity. This is great.
If you have any questions, by all means, email me at Abramowitz at avaesq@gmail. It's easiest, Ava-esque, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Great. Natalie?
Thank you so much, Ava. What an incredible presentation. I was taking notes the whole time. Really, really love the information that you shared with us. Well done. Thank you.
I just saw something flash. It says, I have a mediation in a half an hour. I'll use your suggestions. Try them out in a low stakes situation and see where it takes you before you try it in a high stakes situation. Because if it doesn't work for you because you haven't had the practice, you'll sit there and go, I should not listen to that lady. She doesn't know. So try it in a low stakes situation, get your confidence, and then apply it when it's real.
Sound advice? Ava, thank you so much for a wonderful
Thank you,
presentation.
everybody.
And with that, we are complete.